Land of their possession. Esau was the father of the Edomites.
Thank you, Pastor.
Whew, yes, yes.
And I practiced that so hard so I can say those names.
I'm seeing like 2 or 3 of each ones of you out there. There's like everything is fuzzy.
Wow.
All right, I just thought that would be the quickest way to get through it. But anyway, we see in chapter 36 the genealogies of Esau. Now the question you have to ask, and actually I was just talking to somebody last week about genealogies and what the significance of the genealogies are. And really you have some genealogies like in Matthew chapter 3 and Luke chapter 1, which are the genealogies of Jesus. And those genealogies are important because they show the line of David and the line of Abraham, and they're important because you trace from Abraham to David to Jesus, and it shows that God fulfills his promises. And so the genealogies like that are pretty important. However, in my example, in talking to these people, I was talking about the genealogies of Ezra. Understanding the genealogies of Ezra are not so easy to understand, the genealogies found in Ezra. But then here, in our chapter tonight, Genesis chapter 36, you have the genealogies of Esau. So you have to ask the question, why? Why is a whole chapter of Genesis devoted to the genealogies of Esau? And I don't know if I can come up with a satisfactory answer for that. This is the Word of God, and He has it here for a purpose and a reason, and it's hard to understand the exact purpose for this, but let me just try and give you some suggestions or possibilities at what we see here in this chapter. One of the purposes of genealogies, and by the way, let me bring up the map. You'll see Edom down there below the Dead Sea, south of the Dead Sea, and this is where Esau is going to dwell. Esau is, there are 3 names that are used for Esau, and we saw this when they were born. You have Esau, the name of the guy. You have Edom, which is another name for him. And you have Seir, which is another name that is used for the Edomites. And Seir has to do with the location, and also we saw that it was one of the children of Esau. So you have that place, Edom. That is going to be the location of the Edomites. And so it's south of the Dead Sea. And actually today you can go all the way to the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba there in the south. And you can go to Petra. How many of you ever heard of Petra before? That was a major city of the Edomite kingdom. And you can see how you go in between a narrow, like a ravine between 2 cliffs. And you go through this narrow ravine, and it opens up, and you have the city, which is built into the rock. They kind of carved it out of the side of the mountain there. And it was a place that was easy to defend because there wasn't a lot of access to it, and so on and so forth. So anyway, that's part of the Edomite nation, and this is where they're located. So what is the purpose of this? And let me just give you some suggestions. I've done the best that I can here. But first of all, when you have genealogies, the genealogies are given to affirm or establish someone or something. So if you have a genealogy of someone, it is meant to establish him or to set him up or to show something or to reveal something about him. So in the case of the Edomites, you were going to have an ongoing tense relationship between the Israelites and the Edomites. And this is going to go on from this point all the way through. The tension, of course, started when they were born, and it's going to continue in their generations throughout the history of Israel. And so you're going to have the Edomites. They form a significant nation in the life and the history of the Israelites. A number of the prophecies in the prophetic books make mention of Edom. For example, the whole book of Obadiah, the Obadiah in the Old Testament, the whole book is a prophecy against the Edomites. The whole book. Now, it's only 1 chapter, but still, we're talking 30 verses, and it exists. Obadiah exists to be a prophecy against Edom. So that reflects its import in the interchange between Israel and the Edomites. The major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, all talk about the Edomites. There's a section in each one of the major prophets concerning the Edomites, and it's almost never positive. It's always a negative thing. Joel, the prophets Joel and Amos also mention the Edomites. So anyway, you have a genealogy like this in chapter 36 in order to establish the Edomites and to show that Esau, he had children, and these children became chiefs and they became kings. There's even one verse in here that says, these are the kings of Edom before Israel had a king. So it shows that they grew and they multiplied and they established themselves here in the land, even prior to the Israelites establishing themselves in their land. Now, of course, the Israelites took a little bit of a side route when they went down to Egypt, and so that kind of set them back about 400 years or so. But anyway, not that timing matters, but there is a comment to that effect here in the passage that the Edomites were established, they had their kings before the Israelites had their kings. So that's one possibility for finding this genealogy here. Another one, purpose for the genealogies is to highlight qualities and characteristics of a person. So here you have the Edomites, and I think what's important to see is that you have the Edomites and Esau's generations setting themselves up over and against Jacob and his. It says in particular that they left the land and they came down here because the land was not large enough to hold both of them. So there's a separation that takes place. And while they might have done it for pragmatic reasons, we know from their birth that God loved Jacob and God hated Esau. And so you have this tension between Jacob and Esau. Jacob, as imperfect as he was, and I think I'm getting ahead of myself here, but Jacob, as imperfect as he was, always was willing to follow after God. Esau, on the other hand, was always separating himself from God. So in the book of Hebrews 12:16, it says that Esau was a profane person, a sexually immoral person, and he was of the flesh. He sold his birthright for some stew. So this was Esau. That's what characterized him. And this is fleshed out in his generations. So we see right at the beginning, these people, I don't know if you remember, if you picked up on this, but regularly I read Esau's wife, this person, or Esau's wife, that person, or Esau's wife, this person. I mean, it came out regularly. And that is a fleshing out of the first part of the chapter here, where it said that Esau marries, and now here it is, now listen, he marries the Canaanites, he marries into the Hittites, he marries into the Horites, he marries into the Ishmaelites, and he marries into the Hivites. So we have 5 of these nations, all of which are rejected by God, and yet Esau is going in that direction. And so there's this, instead of this fellowship or joining with God, there's this fellowship and joining with the people of the land. And we're going to find that when the Israelites come back to the promised land, that they are warned not to marry the people of the land. They are to separate themselves from them. So we see here that Esau, being this fornicator and this profane person, that he is of the world and he's going after the things of the world, the people of the world. And that's where his heart is. That's what he's going after. And so that's kind of coming out in the genealogies. And then it brings us some relationships as a result of this. Of course, you have Israelites who are going to engage with the Edomites regularly, but there's also one of his sons, Amalek, and he's the father of the Amalekites, who's also going to have some kind of established place, and they're going to have this tense engagement with the Israelites. So that's the second, that's the third one there. So that's those are the three. So let me say that again. So first of all, to establish someone or something, so that's the setting up of the Edomites. The second is to highlight the qualities or the characteristics of a person, and so we see kind of fleshed out, pun intended, the profane and the sexually immoral characteristic of Esau. And then thirdly, to identify the relationships that are going to be important, and that's going to be the relationship. These are not positive relationships, but the relationship between the Edomites and the Israelites and the Amalekites and the Israelites. So that's going to come out in this genealogy. All right, so that's why we have the genealogies here. And here's where I was getting ahead of myself. And this is the importance of the call of God. So God called Jacob and loved Jacob. And like I said before, Jacob being far from perfect, always, when God appeared to him, what was Jacob's response? It was positive for the most part. You know, he sees God and he puts an altar there and he commits to following after him. And then, of course, he's going to go off track. But then he sees God again and he's going to follow after him. So you have this pursuit, as imperfect as it is, of Jacob for God. But Esau is not called by God, and Esau is hated by God, and therefore his profanity and his immorality and his worldliness is going to reflect his lack of relationship with God. All right, that's the best I can do with Genesis chapter 36. If I was writing it, I might have said some of those things in about 5 verses, and then we would have just moved on to Joseph. Rather than listing all of these names and identifying people that are never mentioned again in Scripture. So that's how I would have done it. But I'm not God, and He knows what He's doing better than I.
What is the significance of chief?
Yeah.
Is there?
Well, I think.
Why some are called chiefs?
Yeah. This is pretty early. This is pretty early on, and I think that's a good question. I really don't know the answer to that. I was going to say that it's early on, and so you have these bands within the families. They wouldn't have been kings because they're all under Esau, as opposed to a king who is going to be the head of a nation or a place. So all of these generations here of Esau, they all fall under Edom, and you don't have King Jalem and King Korah and King Juice because they don't have their own nation. They are leaders within the nation of Edom. And so if you have a king, it's going to be one, and all of these people fall under that. So they wouldn't have had multiple kings in that case.
Well, I thought it was interesting that when I read, or when you read, now these were the kings who reigned in the land of Edom. These
Yeah.
were the kings.
Now, if you notice,
were the children of Israel.
right?
So
If you notice that though, that's different because it says first you have this king, and then he died, and then you have this king. So there you have only one king, and you're going from.
Okay, but when I read the Bible, I run across a scripture that says the Israelites said, "Why can't we have a king like everybody else?"
Right.
So they were referring to Edom, to Esau.
I mean, everybody around them had kings, but Esau would have been.
The world, as opposed to
Yeah.
what God said, "No, I'm your king."
Yeah.
And
Well-
he finally says, "Well, if you can't accept that, we'll let you do so."
Right. Yeah, Edom would have been one of the nations around them who would have been established and who would have had a king. And
But it
so,
also sounds like the 5 nations,
yeah,
at least the 5 nations of which Moses and Joshua,
right.
or Joshua come in to keep the 5 nations that own the land.
Yeah, that would not have included Edom. As a matter of fact, when the Israelites come out, when Moses is leading them out of Israel, they send envoys to Edom and they say, "Please let us pass.
Yeah.
We're going to stay on the highway. We will pay you for any food that we eat. We just want to pass through your land. We're not going to settle. We're not going to dwell." And the Edomites refused them, and so they had to go around. Edom. So this is outside of the promised land. Edom dwells outside of the promised land.
But
And
it sounds like the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, or whatever, the five groups that were in the promised
oh, that I had mentioned. Yeah, there were more than those that I named. But that shows that Edom, if Edom was going to take sides, they're going to take a side with the Canaanites and the Hivites because they're related to them, more so than they're related to the Israelites now. The Israelites have one ancestor, Jacob and Esau. That would have been the relationship. But after that, Esau's married, from these several nations here, and they have a closer relationship with them. And that might be one of the reasons they knew that the Israelites were coming. They're going to be hostile to the Canaanites, and they refused them to pass through their lands. Even though it says, we're brothers, let us pass through. They're still rejected from that. So that's a good question, Ernie. That's the best I can do with that. Beverly, did you have a question or comment?
I just wanted to note that my Bible says Duke.
Yeah? We know your Bible's strange to begin with.
I was going to say, ask Jim, what is that?
But kings and,
Yeah, they would have been, the chiefs would have been sub-leaders of
right.
portions of the people. They would not have been like the king or the head of the,
Right.
So you would have had one king, and I think that is borne out in this passage, and then you have these chiefs or dukes who just might, a governor might be a governor might be a modern day term that we would apply to these chiefs. They were governors of the areas or the groups of people there. And of course they're grouped by families as opposed to geography, although a family was probably settled in a geographical location. All right, anybody else? No, Stephen. You can ask me at home.